My name is Marcus, and for 15 years, I was the caretaker of the Meridian Tower, a gleaming 30-story monument to corporate success in downtown Chicago. Every morning at 5 a.m., I would unlock those heavy glass doors, breathing in the familiar scent of polished marble and cleaning solutions. The building wasn't just my workplace, it was my kingdom, my responsibility, my pride. I knew every inch of that structure. From the temperamental elevator on the 12th floor that would skip if you didn't press the button just right, to the way the air conditioning system hummed differently when a storm was approaching. The tenants respected me, the management trusted me, and I had built something precious, a reputation for excellence that took years to cultivate. The Meridian Tower housed prestigious law firms, financial consultancies, and tech startups. Important people in expensive suits would nod politely as I ensured their world ran smoothly. "Morning, Marcus," they'd say, and I'd respond with the same warm smile I'd perfected over the years. I was invisible yet essential, the steady hand that kept their empire functioning. My apartment was modest, but I had saved enough to dream of buying a small house outside the city. My daughter Sarah was in her final year of college, and I was proud that my honest work had helped fund her education. Life wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, predictable, and mine. Then came the morning that changed everything. I arrived to find a notice taped to my office door, effective immediately: building maintenance will be transitioned to Pinnacle Property Services. All current staff positions are terminated. The cold, corporate language hit me like a physical blow. 15 years of dedicated service, dismissed with a single sheet of paper. I stood there in the empty lobby, keys trembling in my hand, wondering how my carefully constructed world had crumbled overnight. The building I had loved and protected had become a stranger, and I was suddenly an unwelcome guest in my own domain. The weeks following my termination were a blur of rejection letters and dwindling savings. I had been so specialized in commercial building maintenance that my skills didn't easily translate to other industries. Potential employers would glance at my resume, see 15 years at one location, and assume I lacked adaptability or ambition. My replacement at Meridian Tower was a young man named Kevin, barely out of trade school, working for half my salary. I watched from across the street as he struggled with tasks that had been second nature to me. The building was slowly deteriorating under his inexperienced care, but nobody seemed to notice or care. Sarah called less frequently, and when she did, I could hear the worry in her voice. I had stopped contributing to her college fund, and the stress was showing. My modest apartment felt like a prison, and the savings I had accumulated were disappearing faster than I had ever imagined possible. Depression crept in like a slow poison. I would spend hours sitting in coffee shops near Meridian Tower, watching my former world continue without me. The tenants who had once greeted me warmly now looked through me as if I were invisible. I had become a ghost haunting my own past. 3 months after losing my job, I received an eviction notice. The landlord, Mrs. Chen, had been patient, but patience has its limits. I packed my belongings into boxes, each item a reminder of the stable life I had lost. The small television I had saved for, the coffee maker Sarah had given me for Father's Day, the certificates of appreciation from various tenants, all meaningless now. I found myself in a shelter downtown, surrounded by people whose stories of sudden downfall mirrored my own. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was now dependent on the charity of others, when just months ago I had been the reliable constant in dozens of professional lives. But in the depths of my despair, something strange began to happen. I started noticing patterns, connections, coincidences that seemed too deliberate to be random. The pieces of my downfall weren't scattered by chance, they were arranged by design. My breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While sorting through donation clothes at the shelter, I overheard a conversation between 2 businessmen who had stopped by for a charity photo opportunity. One mentioned Pinnacle Property Services and laughed about their acquisition strategy for prime commercial contracts. They identify buildings with long-term staff, he said, then convince ownership that they can cut costs with newer, cheaper workers. It's brilliant, really. They target the loyalty factor. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just corporate efficiency, it was a calculated strategy that had destroyed my life. I began to investigate, using the computer at the public library to research Pinnacle Property Services. What I discovered made my stomach turn. Pinnacle wasn't just a cleaning company. It was part of a larger network that specialized in disrupting established service relationships. They would identify buildings with experienced, well-paid maintenance staff, then present proposals that seemed irresistible to cost-conscious property managers. The human cost was irrelevant to their business model. I found records of dozens of buildings where the same pattern had played out. Experienced caretakers, security guards, and maintenance workers were being systematically replaced by younger, cheaper alternatives. The quality of service inevitably declined, but by then, Pinnacle had already secured their contracts and moved on to the next target. My case wasn't unique, it was part of a deliberate strategy. But knowing this didn't make me feel better. It made me angry. These people had destroyed lives as casually as they might cancel a magazine subscription. They had turned human dedication into a liability, experience into a weakness. I started documenting everything. Names, dates, patterns, connections. I interviewed other displaced workers, gathered evidence, and slowly built a comprehensive picture of Pinnacle's operations. The research became my obsession, filling the empty hours with purpose and gradually replacing despair with determination. But as I dug deeper, I discovered something that shattered my understanding of what had happened to me. The conspiracy wasn't just about corporate greed, it was personal. Someone had specifically targeted me, and when I uncovered their identity, it would change everything I thought I knew about trust and betrayal. The truth came to me through a chance encounter at a job fair. I was walking past a booth for Harrison & Associates, one of the law firms that had been my tenants at Meridian Tower, when I heard a familiar voice. It was Jennifer Walsh, the office manager who had always been particularly friendly, always stopping to chat about her weekend plans or ask about my daughter's progress in school. She was speaking to a recruiter about her recent promotion to partner track, mentioning how she had helped streamline some operational inefficiencies at their previous location. Something in her tone made me stop and listen from behind a nearby pillar. The old caretaker was competent, she was saying, but he was getting expensive and, frankly, a bit too familiar with our business. You know how it is with these long-term service people. They start to feel entitled, like they own the place. I helped the building management see the value in making a change. My heart stopped. Jennifer Walsh, the woman who had brought me coffee on difficult days, who had asked about Sarah's college applications, who had seemed genuinely concerned about my well-being, had orchestrated my downfall. I followed her after the job fair, keeping a careful distance as she met with two other people at an upscale restaurant. I recognized them, David Chen from the tech startup on the 15th floor, and Margaret Torres from the financial consultancy on the 22nd floor. They were celebrating something, raising glasses and laughing with the casual cruelty of people who had never faced real consequences for their actions. That night, I pieced together the full picture. Jennifer hadn't acted alone. She had formed a coalition of tenants who saw me as a potential security risk. I had been too observant, too present, too aware of their business dealings. They had convinced the building management that I was a liability, not because I was incompetent, but because I was too competent. I had seen Jennifer working late nights, shredding documents that should have been archived. I had noticed David's unusual visitors who never signed in at the front desk. I had observed Margaret's pattern of moving files to off-site storage before regulatory inspections. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but they couldn't risk that I might connect the dots. They had destroyed my life not because I was failing them, but because I was too good at my job. My dedication, my attention to detail, my presence in their daily lives, all the things I had taken pride in, had made me a threat they needed to eliminate. The revelation that my downfall had been orchestrated by people I had trusted transformed my grief into something more powerful: purpose. I wasn't just another casualty of corporate cost-cutting, I was a victim of a conspiracy that had to be exposed. I spent the next month gathering evidence with the methodical precision that had made me an excellent caretaker. I documented every interaction I could remember, cross-referenced it with public records, and slowly built an airtight case. The same attention to detail that had made me a threat to them would now be their undoing. My break came when I remembered something crucial: the building's security system. As caretaker, I had access to archived footage, and I had never returned those credentials. The system stored data for 18 months, and I was still within that window. Working with a former tenant who had always treated me with genuine respect, a private investigator named Rosa Martinez, I accessed the archived footage. What we found was damning: clear evidence of Jennifer, David, and Margaret meeting secretly in the building's conference room, documents being shredded outside normal protocols, and unregistered visitors being escorted through service entrances. But I wanted more than just evidence. I wanted justice. And I realized that the best way to get it was to use their own tactics against them. I had learned something valuable during my months of desperation. How to become invisible, how to observe without being noticed, how to gather information without revealing my presence. I began my own quiet campaign. Anonymous tips to regulatory agencies about document destruction. Carefully worded suggestions to the IRS about unusual financial activities. Strategic leaks to investigative journalists about potential corruption in high-rise commercial buildings. The investigation that followed was swift and devastating. Federal agents raided Harrison and Associates, seizing files and computers. David's tech startup was shut down for violating privacy regulations. Margaret's financial consultancy collapsed when clients discovered their regulatory violations. As I watched the news coverage from my small apartment, I had found steady work and was slowly rebuilding my life. I felt a satisfaction deeper than revenge. These people had tried to make me disappear, but instead, they had created their own worst nightmare, a ghost who knew all their secrets. The final twist came 6 months later. Jennifer Walsh, facing federal charges, reached out through her attorney. She wanted to meet, to explain, to somehow make amends. I agreed, curious to hear what she might say. We met at a small cafe downtown, and she looked nothing like the confident woman who had once brought me coffee. She was haggard, defeated, genuinely remorseful. She explained that the conspiracy hadn't been about malice, it had been about fear. They had been engaged in activities that, while not technically illegal, were ethically questionable, and they had convinced themselves that I was a threat. "We were wrong," she said, tears in her eyes. "We destroyed a good man's life because we were cowards. I'm sorry, Marcus. I'm truly sorry." I looked at her across the table, this woman who had caused me so much pain, and I felt something unexpected: pity. She had lost everything: her career, her reputation, her freedom, and for what? To protect secrets that weren't even worth keeping. "Jennifer," I said quietly, "you didn't destroy my life. You just interrupted it. I'm still here, still standing, still the same person I always was. But you destroyed yourselves." As I walked away from that cafe, I realized that my story wasn't about revenge or justice or even redemption. It was about resilience. About the fact that they could take my job, my apartment, my savings, but they couldn't take my identity, my skills, or my determination to survive. Today, I work as a security consultant, helping buildings identify and prevent the kind of corruption that had once flourished under my unknowing watch. I'm better at my job now, more aware, more strategic. My daughter Sarah graduated summa cum laude and often tells people that her father taught her the most important lesson of all: that integrity isn't about avoiding conflict, it's about surviving it. The Meridian Tower still stands, but it's no longer the gleaming monument it once was. Under cheaper management, it has lost its prestige, its reliability, its soul. Sometimes I walk by and feel a twinge of sadness, not for my lost job, but for the building itself, reduced to a shadow of what it could have been. But I don't regret what happened. Those 15 years weren't wasted, they were preparation. They taught me to observe, to endure, to find strength in quiet competence. When Jennifer and her conspirators tried to make me disappear, they discovered something they hadn't counted on: I was far more dangerous as a ghost than I had ever been as a caretaker. In the end, they didn't orchestrate my downfall, they orchestrated their own. And I was there to watch it happen, invisible but essential, exactly as I had always been. To support the channel, please leave a like and subscribe. Thank you so much.